Welcome back, pro wrestling fans. Welcome back, IWC. It's me. It's me. It's the G.O.A.T. Coming to you live to tape 25 feet below the surface of the earth for another special episodic YouTube adventure here on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel for Chaos Corner. One man, unique, unedited, unscripted, raw dog for you, the fans. I poke that like button, drop an elbow on it, pick up your chair and smash it. Leave a comment, share, subscribe, and give a shout out to my mods, the queen, the OTS tribal queen, and of course my brother from another mother, there is no other, for holding it down, keeping it real, and maintaining it, and that's one Austin Nance. I appreciate your loyalty, Austin. Become a member. It's only, I don't know, $2 or $3 a month. It's the best way to support this channel. Let's jump right into it. A temporary distraction, a stress reliever. Much love and respect for being here. I greatly appreciate it. It's going to be one heck of a show. Who is the GOAT? Think about it. Who is the GOAT in pro wrestling? We're going to cover it with the WWF, the WWE first. Follow me over on Twitter, aka X, at Big Daddy GOC, and the GOC stands for the Guardian of Chaos. Let's jump right into it. You could be forgiven for having missed it amidst the build-up to WrestleMania. But in March, Hulk Hogan was interviewed on a podcast called The Two-Man Power Trip of Wrestling and said two things that seemed quite important. The first was to essentially announce his retirement. When asked whether he could wrestle again, the Hulkster pointed out he had been in surgery 23 times during the past decade alone and made his most frank admission that his in-ring days are behind him. The second was to comment on his place in wrestling history, about which he said the following. Years from now, they'll just have to at least acknowledge and just say it. They will say, this is to quote Hogan, he's the greatest wrestler ever. That's not an ego thing. That's just from being on TV for so long and so many people know me. But that will probably be the legacy for the general public. Let me know what you think. And so often with Hogan, it's best to take what he said with a pinch of salt. He has long been a master of self-publicist who knows how to say something that will get a headline, that's for sure. Rest in peace, Hulk Hogan. That's not necessarily a criticism. In fact, it's a good skill to have in the professional wrestling industry, but it does mean that he might say things with an eye on keeping the spotlight pointed in his direction. And at times, those statements might contradict each other, just like the pro wrestling world. For example, at other moments in recent past, he also claimed that others, notably Ric Flair, are greater than himself and has seemed to be angling for one more in-ring payday rather than declaring himself retired. Nonetheless, he raised an interesting question, especially at around the same time as The Undertaker was being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and Steve Austin was returning to main event WrestleMania after 19 years in retirement. The question is a simple one, although not really, especially when you take into consideration other companies like the NWA, the AWA, the territorial system. So I want you guys and gals to really think about this. Who really is the greatest of all time? Comparing Hogan's legacy to every other wrestler in every promotion in every era seems like a task that might be a little ambitious for a single magazine article. So to keep things manageable, we'll limit our discussion here to who has been the greatest in the WWE/WWF, rather than the pro wrestling world as a whole. That immediately helps to narrow the field somewhat and to eliminate some figures who might otherwise be leading contenders. Flair is a good example. Since the most majority of his greatest work took place outside of the McMahon Empire, of course, even constraining ourselves to WWE doesn't mean that any list of 10 names won't require some controversial omissions. Very true. Triple H, who recently announced his retirement, might be among those who could reasonably feel aggrieved for having been excluded, and Randy Orton might also wonder if his 20 plus years of effort for the company have been unfairly overlooked. Now let me say that to say this because I tell it like it is. In my opinion, neither Orton nor Triple H are the GOAT, or even close. I don't even think Triple H or Orton are in the discussion. Just my opinion. So take that for what it's worth. For my 50 plus years as a researcher, historian, producer, agent, scout, setter up of rings, sweeper of floors, ticket seller, flyer hanger, in-ring performer, talent, pro wrestling manager who took the fucking bumps. And of course my 30-year in-ring career, or we'll say in-ring journey, which most of you out here can't say that. That's what makes this show different. No better than anyone else. Unique, because this isn't a fucking podcast, it's a show. No offense, man. Kayfabe, what'd I say? There are plenty of others for whom you could make a case. Roddy Piper, Mick Foley, Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, Brock Lesnar, and too many others to keep listing. The list does not include any women either, and it shouldn't. That should be for another show for another time, which is not a reflection on anyone's talent, but rather on the fact that the company has only presented its female wrestlers on an equal footing in the past decade or so. And so several women who might later be in the conversation are still in the process of building their legacies. And again, it doesn't belong in the same list anyway. It just doesn't. I think that's the dumbest thing pro wrestling ever did, was to include in Pro Wrestling Illustrated or any other rankings men and women in the same category. Or the whole start here of intergender wrestling, men versus women. It doesn't sell. It doesn't work for me. It's not realistic. It's not believable. You're going to have a male wrestler go out and sell and register and bump for a 260-pound monster one night, and then 2 nights later be in the ring with a 150-pound female and try to register and sell for her? Because that's the biggest trend in the indies right now, and I think it's going to become the biggest trend in the major leagues, which will be a big mistake. It doesn't work. It's not believable. It doesn't sell. It just doesn't. That's my opinion. It'll ruin the industry. But then again, this new demographic of fans from 18 to 35 or whatever category it is, I mean, a bunch of neckbeards and geeks and mouth breathers and virgins and goons and dweebs and fans that have the brain of a dehydrated BB, a bunch of pencil neck geeks. And I'm not talking about my fans. I mean, lighten up. I could smell yous from here. And if you don't like it, you can change the fucking channel. I apologize for the cussing. It just doesn't belong. Even with all of these caveats, you might still be offended that your favorite is missing. But the intention here is to basically been to list those who were not only among the most talented, but also the most influential in company history and whose contributions to its success have been most indispensable. Remember the criteria. It's all up for debate, especially if you go by eras, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s into the 2020s. I mean, it really is, depending on what era, what age group, what genre. I'm just saying. It's a good discussion, though, one that's not often had. Those who have become household names to such an extent that they would be among the first to be mentioned if you ask the average member of the public to name a WWE wrestler. So without further ado, here is the case for and against 10, count them, 10 of the biggest names in company history being described as the GOAT. Let the furious debate begin. Take out your notebooks, man. Class is in session. Again, no particular order. Bruno Sammartino. In so many ways, Bruno Sammartino's story is the classic 20th century example of the American dream in action. After spending his childhood hiding from Nazis in wartime Italy and fending off an assortment of illnesses, he arrived in Pittsburgh in 1950 as a teenage immigrant who couldn't speak a word of English. His experience of being bullied at school saw him turn into weightlifting, and within 6 years he went from a scrawny kid to a muscle-bound athlete who came close to making the U.S. Olympic team. Instead, he turned to pro wrestling, and by 1963, he was booked by Vince McMahon Sr. to become the second ever champion of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. A hero to fans across the Northeast, particularly in the Italian-American community, Sammartino's title reign lasted 7 years and 8 months. Still easily the longest in company history. And after a second reign that lasted over 3 years, his combined time with the Gold totaled 4,040 days. 4,040 days. He sold out Madison Square Garden on a jaw-dropping 188 occasions and was the franchise player in McMahon's territory throughout the 1960s and 1970s, without whom the company may never have been strong enough for Vince McMahon Jr. to launch his takeover in the industry in the years that followed. It's really not much of a stretch to say that, along with McMahon Sr., the WWE is the house that Bruno built. I'm going to have to agree with that in my own personal viewpoint. You guys know my history with Bruno. I took over his office for the North American Wrestling Alliance, the NAWA, as commissioner. Bruno stepped down, I stepped in. Became the longest running reigning commissioner in pro wrestling history. Over 20 years, yours truly, until I was let go, and then Mr. USA Tony Atlas became the NAWA commissioner and might be the current commissioner. Bruno Sammartino, to the Guardian of Chaos Big Daddy, to Mr. USA Tony Atlas. Talk about nostalgia. It just ain't what it used to be. So does that make him the company's GOAT? You could certainly make that case, not least because without Sammartino, there probably wouldn't be a Hogan, an Austin, or anyone else on this list. His drawing power in terms of live crowds was as good as anyone on the list as well. Veteran wrestling journalists, Dave Meltzer, Uncle Dave, we know where he is now in 2025, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. His analysis of the top drawing talents in history places him second in North America's all-time list, behind only Jim Londos, whose dominance of the scene in the 30s and 40s was even more complete. Meltzer lists Sammartino as the top draw in the U.S. for 8 years. Not bad. 5 of them in the 1960s and 3 more in the mid-70s, as well as many more where he was comfortably inside the top 3. It's that longevity that arguably places him above others on this list. Perhaps even The Undertaker, in my opinion, without question, in terms of time spent as a full-time wrestler at the top of the card. He was the absolute top attraction for 2 generations of fans, spending longer on top than anyone else who would follow. Let's also take into consideration how much the wrestlers, the talent, the grapplers, the stars worked back then than they do now. It's a big thing and a big factor to take into consideration. When guys defend titles once a month or wrestle a handful of times a month, or when back then they would do that in a week. 6, 7, 8 nights a week. That's right, doubles on Saturdays and Sundays. House shows, which is sorely lacking for today's talent, who gets no ring time. You can't possibly compare the athletes of the last 2 decades to the previous ones. That's just my opinion. Just my opinion. Let me know what you think. So, is the argument settled already? Not exactly, although it would be inaccurate to say he was only known in the northeastern United States, because Bruno competed across the country and internationally, including multiple trips to Japan. Sammartino's prime was before the WWF became a truly mainstream sensation. He was certainly a celebrity in his day, friendly with the likes of Frank Sinatra and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and important enough to be granted a private audience with the Pope when he visited the Vatican. But through no fault of his own, he didn't really have the chance to get the same level of global exposure as those who followed. And we have no means of comparing him against others on other metrics. For example, his career was winding down just as pay-per-view was in its infancy, and before any wrestling company had weekly TV that was syndicated everywhere in the United States. Would this appeal to live audience have translated to the same success in front of a global television audience? Quite probably, but we'll never know for sure. Nonetheless, Bruno Sammartino was the dominant force for the first 20 to 25 years of what is now the WWE, a trailblazer. For those who followed him and for those who lived through his time on top, he was nothing short of a folk hero. Now the pros for Bruno: the longest reigning champion in WWE history, top star in the company across its formative first 2 decades. What would the cons be? Others who have followed him claimed greater worldwide notoriety. No way of knowing how successful he would have been in the pay-per-view era. Well, I can probably answer that question. It would still be Bruno is uno. I might do this in 2 parts. We'll see what happens. So don't go anywhere. Who is the GOAT of the WWE? Andre the Giant. There are few legends in modern popular culture, let alone in pro wrestling, that have endured like that of Andre the Giant. Billed at 7 feet 4 inches and 520 pounds, probably an exaggeration, but not by much. Not by much. The real-life Andrei Rousimov suffered from gigantism, which doomed him to an often painful existence and an abbreviated life expectancy, but also helped him to become a bona fide superstar in professional wrestling. Taught to wrestle by the age of 18, he moved to North America in his mid-20s and was soon booked by Vince McMahon Sr. as a touring attraction, traveling territories as an immovable babyface behemoth. Because this was an era before regional promotions could be seen by far beyond their borders, coast to coast and border to border, the myth of a giant touring the country only grew throughout the 1970s, and even those who did see him on television wanted to see him in the flesh. Comfortably inside the top 10 draws each year from the mid-70s onwards, Andre was another essential foundation of the McMahon Empire, although in a different way to Sammartino, who was the ever-present champion. Andre was booked very carefully so that he never outstayed his welcome, only appearing in any market, sparingly so that the wow factor never faded. In fact, during most of 15 years of working for the McMahons, he never lost a match prior to WrestleMania 3, Although outside the WWF, he definitely lost a few. Let's get our facts straight here. You come here to learn things, so you're better off when you fucking walked out of here than when you walked in. So you can hold a conversation at your next holiday party, during the holiday season, your next event, your next venue, your next barbecue gathering, water cool, the pub, the restaurant, the tavern, wherever the fuck it is that you hang out. And I apologize for the cussing. You can see the passion and motivation of why Chaos Corner is still here. Over 1.5 million total views. Over 6,500 videos on this channel. If you can't find something here, you can't find it anywhere. Nobody works harder for you than I do. That's just a fact. Raw dog. You can see here. No green screens, no music, no intros. Not a lot of actual live, but it's within 24 hours or less. So it's basically live to tape live. Yeah, I don't follow or report as much on the current product of WWE, AEW, TNA Impact. It's always on in the background. I'm informed on what's going on, and I reported on it up until recently. But I'll leave that to other people to report on the current day pro wrestling industry, and I'll pop in and out. History and nostalgia and facts is what you learn here. Of course, in many fans' minds, it's WrestleMania 3 for which Andre is most remembered. And there is no doubt that his role, that seminal event, adds to his importance in company history. By this point, Andre's fame was undeniable, and the stories that were told about him seemed implausible and yet strangely possible at the same time. Depending on who you asked, he could pick up a full-sized car with ease. He once knocked out a man for 3 days with a single punch. And he had once chugged 119 bottles of beer in a single session at a hotel bar without even feeling tipsy. Perhaps more importantly, the WWF started claiming he had never ever been slammed, let alone defeated. So when Andre turned heel and challenged Hulk Hogan to a match at the Silverdome in front of 93,000 fans, which we know was exaggerated, just like AEW does nowadays, nothing's changed. Another exaggeration, of course, but whatever. He was the perfect choice, a character who was as much myth as he was man, and with such a reputation for being indestructible that even the most ardent Hulkamaniac wondered if their hero was doomed. Of course, we all know what happened next, but sometimes the story of WrestleMania 3 overshadows another match with Hogan that was arguably just as important. February 1988. The Pairs rematch was arguably just as important. In February 1988, the Pairs rematch was featured in the first live primetime network special for pro wrestling in over 30 years. It attracted 33 million viewers. Are you listening? That's accurate. 33 million viewers. A whole 6 months of WWE and AEW programming today couldn't make up those viewers. Remember the history of pro wrestling compared to what you guys and gals think today is. No disrespect to the talent. It's not their fault. Not all the time. Making it easily the most watched pro wrestling match in American history. And Andre ended Hogan's first title run with a tainted victory that enraged the nation. Vince McMahon's product had never been more mainstream in American life than it was at that moment, and surely never has been since. Andre's influence on pop culture didn't end there. At around the same time, he had his most fondly remembered Hollywood moment in The Princess Bride. And despite his death in 1993, at the age of just 46, his notoriety has remained intact in the years since. At around the time of his death, artwork featuring his face featured prominently in a street art campaign that started appearing on stickers in cities across the country, shared by street artists and the skater community. Interesting information. The work by artist Shepard Fairey formed the basis for the Obey fashion brand that appeared in the years that followed and helped to give Andre's likeness a place in history beyond the wrestling world. Inside that world, however, is still where he is best known. He was undoubtedly a major part of the World Wrestling Federation's early history and its first ever Hall of Fame inductee just after he passed away. Was he the GOAT? It's a difficult case to make given the strength of the competition, but his life, his career, and the mythology that surrounds them mean that the conversation wouldn't be complete without Andre in it. The pros? A major attraction and bona fide star for the World Wrestling Federation in the 70s and 80s, even into the early 90s. Helped cement the company's global expansion through his feud with Hulk Hogan, Rock and Wrestling, MTV, the whole 9 yards, even the Shea Stadium series. The cons? He was only used sparingly in the World Wrestling Federation. He was a global traveler everywhere, fans. You know that if you know your research. And often sent touring to other promotions in other countries. Never cast as the kind of franchise player that most in this list have been, unfortunately. So don't go anywhere. This is part 1. Who is the GOAT in the WWE? I'll be back with part 2, and we'll move on and we'll move forward. Let me see what else that I have here. We covered Bruno and Andre. Fast forward, next we go to Hulk Hogan, Bret the Hitman Hart, The Undertaker, and beyond. I'll say that to say this because I tell it like it is. Come on back and don't you dare miss it.